Доброго дня, шановні глядачі. Власне,
Good afternoon, dear viewers, dear listeners. We are starting a public discussion of Draft Law 6504, ready for the second reading. We are honored to have Deputy Speaker Korniyenko, Ms. Alyoshina from Civil Service Agency, representatives of local government of Ukraine, and Mr. Popescu, distinguished representative of the Council of Europe, who has accepted our invitation to take part in our discussion and inform us of the Council of Europe standards. Well, this draft law is one of the priority laws. Of course, needless to say, the present revision of the draft law is supposed to be a trade-off between different positions, a product of compromises between the association, the parliament, and the service, and we hope that we will demonstrate its advantages. In my presentation, I will tell you more about the key novelties proposed by this law, and then we'll open it for discussion. The draft law at hand is expected to introduce several important notions. It defines the specific features attendant upon the elected officials, as well as it regulates contracts to be made with the so-called executive support service. As far as the positions in local government, the draft law differentiates between career officers, executive support, and bodies of support functions in the local government. Now, with regard to the local government officials, you can follow it on my slide. I will only highlight certain suggestions we discussed earlier, looking at the possibility of making positions in the local government open to members of the European Union, but we insisted it shouldn't be that way. As far as heads of the services is concerned, it's a scarecrow, so to speak. You may see for yourself what the situation for the communities won't change. Rather, it will help manage human resource there. Now, with regard to the competitive selection, indeed, the law introduces model rules. However, every community will be free to approve of its specific rules as long as they're in line with some standards. In effect, any person can learn about the vacancies going to the official website of the local council or to the unified portal of the public service. By the way, please mind that we have started to call it public service to make it aligned with the standards in Europe. Sigma, who helped us a lot, had some reservations with regard to the video recordings of the competitive selection procedures. We really don't want to make it's possible for people who are not very articulate to take leading positions, and therefore citizens will have every opportunity to scrutinize the selection. Also, the second runner-up may be entitled to appointment in a position within 1 year after competitive selection. If, for instance, the winner, for some reasons, is denied the right to take that position. Salaries is one of the most sensitive part of the proposed legislation. There existed different positions. On one hand, our European partners said that the ratio should be regulated more strictly. We understand that when Ukraine is closer to the European Union, we can start this discussion. However, now, when officials are, well, almost underpaid, we decided to provide as follows. There should exist a minimum wage, so to speak, and a significant number of representatives of local government supported this position. Same time, bonuses shouldn't be a matter of contention in the society. Therefore, we decided to provide that the substantiation or justification for bonuses be accessible to the public. This is all about transparency. Now, as far as the promotions are concerned or career paths, we believe that this law makes good use of KPIs to be applied in local government. I already mentioned guarantees, so now let me say a few words about the Executive Support Service. Again, this was something that generated a lot of discussion. Mr. Korniyenko here will probably will confirm how important it is to have a strong executive support service. On the other hand, there may exist situations of conflicts between the head of the council and the council itself, in which situations the council will be able to regulate certain things by making decisions on the salaries paid to the executive support service. And last but not least, several important things that might also be manipulated. Conflict of interest, that is to say, prohibition for an official to take political positions in the same community will only take effect after the second convocation of local councils. Again, insofar as the full implementation of the law may send the system in a certain disbalance, it is deferred until the time that the martial law is lifted in Ukraine. So this has been a very short overview of the draft law. It is probably time for us to open discussion and invite the, well, who I would call a mastermind behind this legal initiative, Mr. Korniyenko, first Vice Speaker of the Ukrainian Parliament. Thank you, Vitaly. I'd like to appreciate the contribution of the committee and the entire team that contributed to this piece of legislation. Scores of work groups were involved, and every good quality text is a result of discussion, of inclusive discussion. And this text, to me, is something that reflects an agreed position of the professional community and the national agency of civil service with its many years of experience, and of course the position of the leading parliamentary committee, the holder of the institutional memory, as it were. Now, why I say so? Because the committee is also civil servants who worked with many convocations of the parliament. Under law, they are supposed to be impartial and unbiased, and this is something we would like to see in the performance of the officials of our local government bodies, self-government bodies. We observed various developments in the course of our decentralization reform that reinforced local self-government. Now the time is to make local self-government even more professional and capable. For some political considerations, the law was at its time delayed, suspended, and we must have wasted almost 5 years of what we would have put into making the performance of local self-government more professional. We started working on this present text just after the local elections, knowing full well that it wouldn't serve the purpose before those local elections. Of course, war made us change our priorities, not only with this law but everywhere, and this present law will take effect with reasonable delay, but the reform has started. One of the reasons why it is important and why it is important now, today, is because public service in Ukraine is undergoing transformation, and we're well aware of the fact that one of the tracks of this transformation is related to the territorial bodies of government. On the other hand, we are looking forward to a stronger local self-government that will have more and more resources, budget, land, privatization revenues. We have also relieved certain conditions for borrowings. So on one hand, resources are now greater, as great probably as the expectations of the local communities, and this calls for greater professionalism of local self-government. This can only be achieved if we stick to the principles set forth in the proposed legislation, so that the services provided to local communities are of adequate quality, healthcare, planning, transportation, utilities, education. But in addition to that, we want to make all of 1,480 territorial communities capable and successful. So in maybe 5 years, the framework to be set by this present law will help communities start working on their own development, on their own resources, and the quality of services provided by local self-government will be more or less aligned across the country, because after the war, when it would be very important for us to maintain adequate living standards of our citizens. We are citizen-oriented lawmakers and politicians, and in conclusion, I'd like to say that the inclusive, multi-level nature of the discussion has indeed helped us resolve multiple issues, resorting to fairly unorthodox solutions, and I hope that the society will largely accept these proposals. With this, once again, let me appreciate contribution of everyone, all work groups, your subcommittee, Vitaly, and later on we will have yet another round of discussions in the parliament in a productive, so to speak, spirit, all aimed at voting positively for this draft law and its signature by the president, so it can, well, in due time takes its effect. In the meantime, we can provide training to the officials to be, and local politicians should probably get ready for the time when they can't become officials. That's the rule set down in this law. There'll be other social guarantees, but that's your choice after all, whether you go in for politics or become an official of government bodies. The Code of Public Service we are now making laws to support this idea, but the time will certainly come for us to codify all this legislation into a public service code that will cover practically everything related to it. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexander. Thank you for your support in promoting this law. I hope that it will finally be approved. You know, during the last year, we've been talking with our international partners who support Ukrainian communities. Oftentimes they say, we provide resources, we provide generators, what should we invest in, first of all? In these cases, I always answer that they should invest in staff, in qualified professionals, because any other investments will be just one-time spent money. That's why I think this draft law is one of the elements that will improve the current situation. But as I already said in the beginning, I think that the main role in developing this draft law is held by the structure who organizes public service in Ukraine. So a very great contribution was made by Natalia Alyushina. Please, the floor is yours. Thank you very much. Dear colleagues, for us it's an important occasion, an important event. First of all, I would like to comment the words of my colleagues. You said that we need a code for public service. I think that this draft law is a step towards the future code of public service. We are coming closer to it. So thank you for your support. I completely agree with your words, Alexander Sergeyevich. I would also like to point out and thank Mr. Vitaly. Thank you that you kept the focus and the attention to this draft law. I would like to say a few words about this history of this draft law. We managed to organize the working group on our platform. We ensured the transparency, inclusiveness of the process. Every opinion was taken into account, and I think these were intellectual contributions of every member, and every comment, every opinion expressed during the preparation was taken into account. In May 2021, the working group was created, and from that moment until the moment of registration of the draft law in the Parliament, we've cooperated with other committees. A huge amount of work was done, and again, thank you for keeping focus on this work. And I would like to mention the role of the association, the role of the local self-governance bodies. This was not only cooperation, it was a very profound and extensive cooperation, and it was very important to maintain this level of cooperation and active work on the final version of this draft law. Thank you again for reaching this final part. As to our further steps, we are thinking ahead. We are planning our further actions. So the draft law was presented by Vitaly, and after it is adopted, we will give comments and start preparing bylaws. As to the bylaws and the way we are going to work on them, I think we all saw our capacity to listen to everyone and cooperate and take into account the opinion of everyone. We have a successful experience of cooperation. I hope that we will get your support and your active participation even after the draft law is adopted, after it is signed by the President of Ukraine, and of course after the roadmap is prepared to implement this law, to understand what bylaws we need and what we are implementing. A number of provisions will just disappear because they will no longer be needed. For example, they will be related to the competitive procedure, to the certification of the local governors. These regulations will just no longer be needed because there will be new regulations and we will have to work on it. I would also like to say that there are a lot of HR instruments and tools, and we will have to decide what best practices and best tools we will use to implement the laws and the bylaws. And we will be happy to invite you to implement every law and every new practice on the grounds. We'll have to take into account the best practices that exist in the public service, but we will also have to use new practices. We will also try to devise the code for public service. We will also pay attention to the informational campaign to implement the law, starting from the training of officials, local officials, because they will be ambassadors of the transformation of this local governance system, and this training will need a lot of work, and we will ensure the training, methodological support, consultations, and so on and so forth. I would also like to say that we've already started our cooperation with the experts, and thanks to the Council of Europe that we cooperate with, thanks to your support and to the support of some other processes, we've been working on the service for staff management. We think that we should understand the future nuances of this law. We need to have a unified understanding the provisions of this law. Of course, we will have to make more efforts to implement every part of the law. I will speak later about the further steps. We will wait for the reaction, and I would like to express my gratitude to the committee, to the members of the parliament, to the associations, because our common efforts is something that we needed to create a comprehensive draft law. The recovery of Ukraine and work on the occupied regions is something that we will face in future, and we will have enough work for everyone. So again, thank you everyone for our cooperation. Glory to Ukraine. Glory to heroes. Thank you, Natalia. As you can see, we've mentioned contribution of every person because everyone made a significant contribution, and it was quite an emotional draft project. We've had 2 first readings, and we have a person here. It's Alexander Slobozhan, who is well aware of these emotional aspects of the readings. Maybe some things that we said were not really professional, but the cooperation of different associations really helped us to achieve better results and to make a better text for another reading. I will not ask you about money. I talked about our colleague Ms. Luciani from the Council of Europe before this event, and we were speaking about Bucha and Borodyanka and different paces of recovery. Apparently, it also depends on the capacity of local officials, and I would like to ask you about the future of this situation. How is it possible to foster better capacity of local officials? Thank you very much. The first thing I would like to say is that it is a very important day today. You are just reading my mind. When I was starting my career, I was a local official, a self-government official in a legal department of Izmir Village Council. It is a region of Odessa. And when you were making your presentation, you also mentioned very important aspects we worked on previously, and of course, if at that time we had the draft law we've just prepared with many experts, with the support of the Council of Europe, with experts from different institutions, we would be able to achieve better results. And answering your questions about Bucha, I would like to confirm that the staff, the well-qualified professionals, they are decisive in any process, and many problems are solved in a better way. Every process is well organized. Every person knows what they are doing. There are clear good instructions, and every person knows what he or she is responsible for and how they have to act in different cases. On the 1st of April last year, we saw some problems, but we wouldn't have them if the processes were well organized. And I realized that that what Vitaly said is really crucial. At a time, we didn't have enough resources, and there was a lack of motivation. So when people see that their work is appreciated, they work differently. We often speak about the future political influences. They will exist for sure, because politics exists. And another point I would like to mention is the difficult story of this draft law. Alexander mentioned it in a diplomatical way, but I will be more frank. For us, we were impressed and shocked by the pace of the work on this draft law. There were a lot of working groups. We've had many discussions, many emotional discussions, and the role of our international partners who provided expertise was very important, because we started to use exact figures and exact reasons and arguments. We were working on different parts of the previous draft laws, the previous versions. Maybe you remember the provisions of the laws that existed many years back, and I hope you understand what we're talking about when we do not when we provide for very specific things in the laws, it secures professionals. And very often when a draft law appears and those who were not involved in its development start to comment, to make comments on these norms, and this leads to some strange things. For example, there are comments that some people lose their control over some systems, that's not true. And we will need the presentation you make in future, because it proves that it's not like that. There were many different provisions in previous years that we will try to avoid now in the future draft law. And in the past, we've had a very negative phenomena, which is an individual payments when officials were able to assign payments to themselves. And these seminars will be useful for the National Agency for Preventing Corruption, because every body of executive powers will benefit from these developments. This draft law reflects very important results that we have achieved.
Frankly speaking, some people say it's not the time, it's premature, it's the wrong time. It is the right time, and I'm sure that the law will soon be voted for and signed into legislation. You were quite right when you mentioned that before it takes effect, a lot of training will need to be provided, and drafting of the relevant secondary legislation. We all know that preparation is necessary so that nobody can excuse themselves during local elections saying they didn't know about that. We discussed the executive support service provisions for several days running before we found a compromise. So I would call upon those who read the text of the draft law to stop trying to resort to some conspiracies. I would want to say that we are very happy with this important step. It's a leap forward. You remember, I recall 2010, 2013. Now we have 2023. So I'm not thinking about the code of. Thank you, Alexander. Following on what you started, lest we have manipulations, because there are some experts teaching the communities how they would live under the new law, which is not enacted yet. So the decks will be circulated. The text will be posted Monday, 24th of April, well in advance of the voting. And also, as we have agreed upon with representatives of local governments, there'd be another round of consultations before the second reading with heads of local communities in order to avoid any ambiguity. The association is lucky to have many members representing urban communities with more skills than elsewhere. So let me ask Slobodyanek, Ivan Slobodyanek, who is head of the All Ukrainian Association of Communities. What are the benefits of this legislation to the communities? And in addition, there's been broad-based discussion with regard to the so-called model documents, instruments. Well, that's what they call experience. You were reading my lips. I was going to raise this issue as I was coming here. We had lots of communication with the agency and the subcommittee, but they were all very helpful because we all were interested in adhering to the European Charter of Local Government. However, back to HR, to the skills. So competitive selection is one, so to speak, focal point of those discussions. In an ideal world, in an ideal society, competitive selection would go for people with proficient in at least 2 European languages, etc. But look at what we have now: mobilization, displacement, migration, and multiple issues. So how do we go about resolving these issues? I hope we will be able to find a workable solution in order to make competitive selection the rule in itself. There should exist some streamlined approaches to appointment and dismissal. Even at the central level, you see there are lots of vacancies, or they are at competitive selection is at standstill because of the restrictive requirements, and therefore if we aim too high, we will certainly bump into this issue, the issue of shortage of skills. Many people fled the country to safer places. We are in competition with private businesses, and private businesses in Ukraine are in competition with, say, Polish businesses, given the geographical situation of our region. We are all for clear separation of power, so to speak, into lawmaking and executive at the local level, but there may be situations when heads of senior officers of local businesses are at the same time representative in the local council, hence potential conflict of interest. I'm still wondering if there's still room for dialogue to help identify some temporary solutions when there is clear shortage of skills available. Generally, however, this is a very useful piece of draft legislation that has to be adopted as soon as possible. Thank you, Mr. Kornienko. Ask for the floor. Okay, I don't think that there is room for that. In Britain, yes, deputies, members of the parliament, can be appointed ministers, but that's the specificity of their law. We are well aware of the shortage of qualified personnel, and this gap may, on the one hand, be closed through better training. Recently, we relaunched the Ukrainian School of Local Government, now called Public Administration. I am honorary president of this school, and I once asked why the government order is 90% more than the real number of trainees. We will certainly pay attention to this situation, and we can't just sit on our hands and wait before some people come? Well, the mechanisms are well known elsewhere. We know that there are some economic circumstances, but we will be able to intervene, for instance, by providing public support to the interested persons. We can scale it up. And there is another facet to it: international assistance programs. Thanks to our international dollars, Haverla, Dobra, and other programs may be approached with a request to make them open not only to civil activists or NGOs, but local officials, because it all serves the interests of the democratic development in the country. And Vitaly, by the way, let me suggest that the committee may want to appoint a meeting to inviting representatives of the Ukrainian School of Public Administration, the most active of mayors. Well, it can be a really populous, so to speak, conference. We have online platforms available. Yes, taxes, naturally. This is going to be free of charge for the attendees. And those who undergo training are bound to get soft skills, competencies, EU law knowledge, etc. That's important story. Let's promote it. Thank you, Mr. Kornienko. Well, you seem to urge us all to support some proposals here and now. So, second week of May, mark this day in your calendars. Second week of May. Yes, sure. Let me briefly respond. I've got some stats handy. It's important to note that the officials of local government, 1,031 persons, are taking English courses using knowledge management platform. We merged education first. Online school, the biggest of its kind, and 14,000 public officials and officers of local government have access to the resources. And Mr. Koreny could probably confirm. I intended to ask another question, but later on. So I support the idea. Let's make it not just a presentation, but a discussion of how we can transform it. Every discussion for me is something that I consider from the case-based approach. Best teachers are practical practitioners who have dealt with cases like that in their experience. But Association of Amalgamated Communities was one of the proponents and supporters of the idea to introduce this minimum wage. Even today, the Ministry of Finance would want to see a smaller guaranteed wage level. The logic is easy. Local government may be even more attractive than service in central government. The position of the committee and the association was unanimous. let's make conditions equally better than equally worse. But it is a sensible thing. So what would you say, Alexander? Do you think that this draft provision meets the expectations of local government better than the previous one? Thanks. Let me start with saying thank you for all who contributed. It is easy for me to say anything. Indeed, I can say that all the provisions are so attractive. There are lots of trade-offs in it. I don't think that minimum wage is an attractive thing for the potential candidates. I've been in local government for quite a long time as head of the community, for instance. If I could have it my way, I would certainly promote competition, but sometimes I can't even find someone who would serve as a chief architect for our community or for any other position very much needed. Smaller communities especially have hard time finding someone who could fill in for any position rather than have any competitive selection in place. I recall the time when I attended professional development courses at that time, something that never helped you improve professionally. It was too formal. As things stand today, the association supports the proposed provisions, seeing some of the potential shortcomings thereof. Anyway, all the responsibility will be on the head of the communities. So I do hope that the electoral legislation will make things clear. No room for politicking at the local level, because you understand that the law on the legal provisions on the interaction of local communities is almost idle. I once supported the idea for the officials to be able to seek positions at local councils. I don't know. In fact, I would rather see current situation be more like earlier district level executive committees made of representatives of multiple communities. From the so political consideration and biases need to be removed as much as they can. That said, I indeed appreciate the number of contributions made by representatives of different work groups working on the draft law. Now we can disseminate this situation to our colleagues, and I hope that we will meet on many occasions in preparation for the time when the draft law becomes law. 10,000 minimum. I am sure that after the victory, the new law will be rid of what I believe is a wrong provision about 10,000. But anyway, our party has consistently been promoting the idea that the district council should go. Now, our European partners are in a position to criticize us if we deserve it. I remember first time when our draft law was sent for Council of Europe's expertise, there was misunderstanding with regard to the service in the bodies of local government. You have public service in, so to speak, mature European democracies. My colleagues mentioned that we are on our way to a code of public service. So how acceptable is our step-by-step movement to European standards? This is the first question for you, Daniel. And second, we try to accommodate Council of Europe's position as much as we could. And I know how much Council of Europe criticized this position on. But let me echo what we heard earlier. Local businesses compete with the government, local government competes with the businesses, and businesses, domestic businesses compete with the Polish ones. For instance, 250 euros might look as an attractive proposition. So what can you say, Daniel, in this regard?
Vitaly, now your first question is quite easy to answer.
Дякую, Віталію. На ваше перше запитання.
Process is better than standing on place. So, and this is a step forward, and I think, as Alexander Slobozhan said, it's a leap forward, and I think it's a good leap forward. It's a good piece of legislation, and indeed we advised on it. I don't think we were excessively critical. I think that we made something like 20 recommendations, and most of them, 29, okay. And majority of them were indeed incorporated. So I think this is indeed an interesting piece of legislation. Now, there is no European model which is generally applicable to all the countries, because countries are different. In some countries, most employees have a private status, as you know, like a private employee. In some countries, most of them have a status of civil servant with different guarantees and so on. But what's important is that you need to strike some balances in this law. You need to make this, let's say, a career in civil service at local level interesting. You need to make it appealing for the people. And for this, you indeed may need to have some sort of bonuses without this completely destroying the system of salaries and the equity between civil servants. You need to offer some stability to civil servants so they can project themselves into a career which will be theirs for sometimes the rest of their professional lives. You need to keep institutional memory in the municipalities, but you should be able also to get rid of those who don't perform. You need to have civil servants who listen to the decisions taken by politicians without becoming political themselves. They need to check their political opinion at the door and become civil servants. And all this is indeed difficult to solve through a single piece of legislation. I think this piece of legislation is good and solves most of the problems. Now, and I would agree with you first and foremost, I would say that in the end, this is the most important asset a local authorities has, its human resources. And indeed, there is a need to invest into it. There is a need to attract it, and indeed here we have the problem of lack of people who have the necessary skills and who are willing to take a job in local self-government, especially in small communities. And this is a problem. And this is a problem not because Ukrainians are not educated. We had trainings analysis, and we know that they are very educated, but sometimes either the conditions are do not offer sufficient incentives for them to stay in those positions, or maybe the training system needs to be improved and reinforced so that they have the practical skills to perform the job. And I would like to commend the National Agency for Civil Service for the progress they have made in respect of the way the training is organized and the offer of training services, which is currently which exists. And I think we cooperated and contributed. I think this is most important. And indeed, this is not the end of the road, because a piece of law is just a piece of paper in the end, which is of course enforced. We have system of enforcing, but when you deal with people, with civil servants, you of course need more than that. Of course, you'll need maybe not a code of legislation about it. We should not over-regulate. You probably need some secondary legislation, but in particular, you need to think of a system of measuring and promoting competence. And of course, a system of making sure that the training offer is adapted to the needs, which means that the right person makes the decision about who to be trained, by whom, and on what, and that everybody has an incentive that this training be efficient, meaning the head of the institution has an incentive to send the right person to the right training, meaning that the professional who offers a training has an incentive to continuously update his or her offer of training to the actual needs of the people, and that the person who is trained, sorry, I have an allergy, the person who is trained has an incentive to make the best of the training he or she receives. I think that's in the end the best system which exists in terms of training. And indeed, of course, there is a competition between private and public sector. Of course there is one. And of course a lot of brilliant minds will be attracted by the private sector and very high salaries. But there is, if you have a salary scale which is sufficiently competitive, it doesn't need to be, better than in the, let's say in Google in California, but with the right conditions of stability, of continuity, with sufficient interest in the substance of the work, and with sufficient training to update the skills of people who can apply, I'm sure that this can be achieved. So I wouldn't say, like Armstrong, this is a big leap for humanity. But it's not a small step either. It's, I think, a very interesting part of the decentralization process. And we are very, very happy, in particular, that the status of civil servants in local government is brought closer to the status of civil servant in central government. I think this is paramount. They are not the best guys in central government and the less good guys in local government. There needs to be a possibility to go from one to the other, to have a mobility, and indeed you have established the conditions for hiring people according to the competence and to produce the mobility which can enrich them and their municipalities. So I would be confident that this will happen, and I'm confident that this will very much contribute to having, let's say, as our previous summit, because we'll have a summit next month in the Council of Europe, but previous summit which was held in Warsaw in 2005 said that the goal of the Council of Europe is to creating sustainable communities where people like to live and work now and in the future. And I wish you to fulfill this, let's say, ambition of the Council of Europe in Ukraine. Thank you.
Та дуже дякуємо за слова і оцінки.
Thank you very much for your comments and your assessment. And I think that your last words about communities people would like to live in now and in future is something very important in our current circumstances. Thank you, dear colleagues, for expressing your opinions. Maybe I will give the floor to Alexander for final words. Thank you, Mr. Daniel, for your words. I'd like to say that we have all the necessary elements, components for the successful adoption of this law. We have the support of stakeholders, we have a good text created by our colleagues, we have an international expertise, we have a popular demand, and I think that the further steps will be successful. The steps that will be undertaken by the leading parliamentary committee together with the national agencies. We will continue our work on implementation of this law. It is also aligned with the program of good governance that we've signed with the Council of Europe, because it's something that is related to this program. And we will continue talking about it in the School of Local Governments. We will try to apply the expertise in practice. And when Mr. Popescu was speaking, I got an interesting idea. I think we will also cooperate with the Board of Donors, with our partners and associations. I think we will make assessment of competences. I think we will have to ensure the assessment of the staff by the citizens, not only but by some institutions. I think it will be great to create a project when the citizens, the grassroots citizens, will be able to assess the competences of the local officers. Because people can also contribute to express different opinions, what they think is important, what qualities are important in local governors. And that will help us to understand what capacities and what skills to develop. And I think that in the framework of our continuing work on promoting civil service, we will organize meetings with people where we'll see in details the work of civil servants. And many other associations will be able to join these meetings just to show people that this job can be a competitive one, and it can interest many people. Just to show that it can be a good profession, and in this law in particular helps us to prove to people that this job can be indeed competitive, can be beneficial for many people, and it can also become an incentive to stay in Ukraine, to develop their local communities, and it's something we all want. So thank you again for your presence, for your contribution in this meeting and this draft law, and we'll start voting and implementing this law. Thank you for your attention.
Малювалася одна дуже цікава програма.